It's a great, great day. It's a good day. Get up.
It's a good day, risers and thrivers. Welcome back to the show. We are happy to have you here with us.
Got dressed and I left at 10. Check my nails.
Thanks, Dwight, for turning that one off. That's great. Welcome back, risers and thrivers. We are happy to have you here with us. Boy, do we ever have another great show for you here today. We hope you really loved the last show with Sydney. Gosh, this really incredible young horseback rider who has faced years of medical misdiagnoses, medical mishaps, failed surgeries, and she is back on her horse per se. She is such an example of resilience and fortitude and mindset, and she was fabulous on the show. So if you missed it, try to catch that one. Up next on Friday, we'll have the real dad of Las Vegas with us here. He is a great gay Christian single young male who is navigating the world of foster and adoption in his efforts to try to raise a child. So that'll be another great show. And yet today we have the amazing Gabor Maté with us today. Daniel is an award-winning Brooklyn-based lyricist and composer for musical theater. With his father, Dr. Gabor Maté, he's the co-author of the recently published, The Myth of Normal, fabulous, Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. And the forthcoming Hello Again, a fresh start for parents and their adult children based on the popular workshop of the same name. He runs a YouTube program called Lyrics to Go, and he also runs the world's only mental chiropractic service. And we're really excited to have him with us today. We're going to get into all of this. Daniel, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Erica. It's really great to be here. I mean, obviously, not only have I read so much about you, I've written so much about you. You showed up quite a bit in the text of the book, but my dad's the one who had done the bulk of the interviews. So this is my first time really encountering you.
Well, and vice versa, because in all my conversations with your dad, he always speaks so highly about you, and it's just really nice. Next time we're all here in Vancouver, we should get together face to face. It would be really nice.
Indeed, that'd be great.
Yeah, this is a real honor. And so last time we actually had Dr. Gabor on the show himself when they were writing the book. And that was a really interesting show because, sometimes I have people on just to tell their personal stories. And other times I bring in, guests and experts to come in to share, bits of tools as to how we can all rise up and heal in this, what's referred to as this toxic culture, which we'll get into in a second. And on that show, Gabor was really, he really surprised me because he really opened up on his own personal journey of writing the book and so much, and he was really having self-doubts at some points about, does anyone even want to hear what I have to say anymore after all these years? I'm this old guy, and gosh, I was just so shocked because for all the success he's attained, for how much the world loves him, even he feels this self-doubt, just like we all do, right? But it's such a powerful form of connection that we all feel so, I don't know, quote unquote, like normalized when you hear other people of that, caliber and of that wisdom who have the same feelings that we all have. And I thought that was a really powerful show. And I'm really happy to have Daniel here now after the book is out to talk about this book with us. So first, can you get into what you would define as this toxic culture? Tell me more about this and what you feel the meaning of it is behind there.
Yeah. So the toxic culture actually originally years ago, before I came aboard the project, was going to be the title of the book.
I see.
It's going to be called Toxic Culture, How Capitalism Makes Us Sick, which is a less inspiring title, I think, than Myth of Normal. It's kind of heavy, but we did want to include toxic culture in the title, in the subtitle, because it's a very important piece of this. We use an analogy in the introduction, and the great thing about this analogy is we don't even need to search for a different word, just a different meaning of the same word. So, when you eat yogurt or drink kombucha, you look in the ingredients list and it says live active cultures, right? If you were a laboratory scientist trying to raise a certain kind of life form, bacteria, say, you would do so in a petri dish, and you would do it in a mixture called a culture, which would be a kind of biochemical broth that's specially designed in terms of temperature, pH levels, nutrients, all that, to support the life and health and growth of a particular organism. And assuming that you had the right fit between culture and species, you would expect your microbes to grow and thrive at a healthy rate and, be themselves, basically. If somehow they were acting abnormally, they were attacking each other, their health was bad, they were dying off in large amounts, they were sick, they were mutating, whatever, you'd make one of two assumptions. Either they have some kind of external disease, some kind of genetic mutation or whatever, or it was the wrong culture to begin with. It was a toxic culture. It's not the right culture to support the growth of that species. And we human beings are very adaptable. We can live in a whole lot of different physical climates. If you think about it, there's no other species, animal or vegetable on Earth, that can survive in as many different kinds of physical environments as we do. And also, from the North Pole to the Sahara Desert. And then there's also cultural climates that we can survive in and that we've adapted all over the world, different ways of relating to the locations we live in, different stories, different languages, infinite expressions of humanity. Human beings have lived in, to quote a famous musical theater song, good times and bum times, and we're still here. And so we're very, very adaptable, which is not to say that we're equally healthy or equally ourselves in all environments. Some environments are going to support the satisfaction of our basic needs, and every species has basic needs in order to either survive or thrive. And you call your listeners, rise and thrivers. And so thriving is a particular thing. It's not automatically guaranteed. What we're saying in this book is that if you wanted to design a culture, a socio-political economic system to make people chronically ill, not kill them off via starvation or air pollution or those kinds of physical environmental deprivations or toxins, although our world has plenty of those too, right? And we're well on our way to creating an environment on the planet in terms of the climate and the temperature that's also inhospitable to human thriving. But we're talking about just in the normal everyday functioning of our society. If you wanted to create a culture that was more toxic to our need for genuine, the sort of environment that allows our needs to be satisfied so that we can be healthily ourselves, physically, emotionally, spiritually. If you wanted to design an environment that does not satisfy those needs, that makes people sick, in other words, you couldn't do much better than the one we've got now.
Yeah, I hear you.
And
I think that's a great analogy that you did.
And it's and the book is a kind of a mystery story, because all you have to do is look around and see the evidence: rising levels of chronic illness, rising levels of suicide, mental illness, addiction, disconnection, loneliness. All of these things that are very, very unhealthy for human beings are rising. And again, we're so adaptable that it's very easy to not notice it, because whatever we're used to, we tend to think is normal, which is where the main title of the book comes from. So we're trying to denormalize the toxicity of the culture, point people to the fact that things are not healthy for humans right now, and then ask the question, well, why is that? And we have to peel back the lid on the things that we consider to be normal in order to ask that question.
Yes. Can I pause for a sec? Because you talked about connection and disconnection.
Yeah.
And in the book, you talk about it like as robbing the human spirit. Let's talk a little bit more about that.
Well, so one of our human needs is connection. We are social animals. Um, and not just social animals in the sense of the marketplace and transactions and all of that, but actually human connection, mutual responsibility, mutual dependence, interdependence.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things you can see in any culture is, in order to justify its own existence and keep itself going, it has to make certain assumptions ideologically about what human nature is. And the first thing you learn in any economics course is, Adam Smith or life, humans are transactional, or we're out to maximize our own individual interests. Or you hear some bastardized version of Charles Darwin, survival of the fittest, which he actually never said. It's a twisting of his observations about how evolution works. But whatever it takes, or in a philosophy course, Thomas Hobbes' life for man is nasty, brutish, and short. These kind of cynical, zero-sum views of what human beings are like and what we're about, which then create a society based on that assumption. But it actually turns out that if you look at our actual evolution, I mean, the so-called period of civilization, if the entire human genus or species, the time we've been humans on this planet, were measured in an hour, we've only been quote unquote civilized for the last 6 minutes. Since the advent of agriculture, the Neolithic Revolution. Before that, we were small band hunter-gatherer groups. Well, how the heck is a small band hunter-gatherer group going to survive with all of the challenges of winter and summer and seasons and different landscapes and different wild animals, and looking for foraging for food, trying to raise children, trying to pass on stories, trying to stick together? You have to have a good instinct, a very strong instinct for mutual interest. And you have to have essentially a conception of self-interest that extends beyond the individual self. And so most cultures before our time, and I don't exactly know where to start the clock, but they would not recognize our version of self-interest because it's so narrow and it's also so self-defeating. So we're wired. We come into the world as a human being. Our instincts, our evolutionary programming hasn't changed just because our external society has changed. So we actually come into the world expecting a certain degree of connection. We expect to be born into a group, into a tribe that everyone takes care of the family who's taking care of us. We expect to have an environment just like, a bear cub expects to be born in a, I think their bears are born in dens, right? And in a cool, quiet, dark environment, right? And birds expect to be born in a nest, free from predators and with an attentive parent. We expect to be born into a certain kind of social environment, whatever will support the parents in a stress-free as possible, equally distributed parenting workload, where the parents can just really be with us. And it's not just the parents, it's not all on the mom and the dad.
It's a village.
It's a village. Exactly. Yeah. Or even, so we expect that, which means if we don't get it, or if we get something very much other than it, we can survive, we can adapt. Again, like I said, we're very malleable. It takes a lot to kill a human being. It really does. But we're not going to thrive to our full potential, and we're going to come out of it distorted in certain ways.
Yeah. On this very note, I just saw this really interesting psychology experiment the other day where, they took this infant and who was engaging with the mom, right? And she was responding to the infant's gestures, right, appropriately, and smiling and showing love and just that engagement as a basic need that we all need, that infants all need at that point, right?
And as a basic instinct. The mother didn't need to learn to do that. The mother was doing it.
Of course. Yeah. But then they had, for the second part of the experiment, they had the mother not respond. right? And they like a blank face, no matter what this infant was doing to try to capture it. Like you could even see the infant trying to goo and trying to gaw to get that mother's attention, right? And then the mother was just blank, emotionless, right? And the infant, you could see the stress building up and the even in the body, and over time, if that infant isn't having that basic need met, he learns that this infant's not going to be responded to, right? And then they start to withdraw.
Yeah.
And so that's exactly what you're talking about with this connection and then idea of disconnection. And how does that impact then? What is that link of that disconnection, let's say, that then impacts illness?
Sure. Well, so, first of all, I should say I'm not a doctor. I'm not a trauma therapist. I'm not in that world at all. So everything I'm going to say comes from me having co-authored this book and, knowing the material.
Yes.
So all of this isn't just psychological. It's not like we grow up, if that happens to us in childhood. And that experiment is a very sad encapsulation of what a lot of children's childhoods are like, not because the parents don't love them, but because parenting instincts have to be evoked by the right environment. And if the parents are too stressed out by marital distress, by economic woes, by social upheaval, by their own depression or mental illness, by their own traumatic imprints, to fully be there, the kid's going to pick it up. It's not about how much love the parent feels. It's about how much they can get across to the child, how much the child perceives and receives. And that's a function of how, unstressed, relatively speaking, the parent can be, or how conscious they are of their stress so that they can really, deliver what the child needs. When it doesn't happen, it's stressful. And stress is a physiological event. It's a full nervous system event. We spend the first few chapters really driving home the point that the mind and the body can't be separated, and that interpersonal biology is a thing, so that we're not, you hear it in song lyrics, you shake my nerves and you rattle my brain. Literally, we understand on a certain level, especially when we're in love or when we're horny, that that life with other human beings is a condition of having your body affected and regulated or dysregulated by what's going on between you and others. So if that happens chronically, that creates what's called an allostatic load, which is the sort of wear and tear of the body constantly trying to have to mitigate the stress levels that are being generated by everyday life and trying to reach some kind of equilibrium. And at some point, something has to give. And what always tends to give is the child's connection with themselves in some way. We get disconnected from ourselves, and that is the essence of trauma. Trauma isn't the bad things that happen.
Yes.
It's
Let's pause on that. Let's pause on that for 1 second, because that's a really important point, right? When people are looking at the title trauma, right? And they're like, oh, I haven't been through any trauma. I had a great childhood, or I've had a great experience. Like, we're not talking about, those big episodes of child abuse or these huge things that can happen. We're talking about these basic moments when our needs are not met, like that infant,
Well, we are talking about the big moments, but we're expanding. We're not only talking about it.
Not only, correct. Sorry, I misread that. And then I want to talk, like, when we have stress, how you describe it, as I understand, is when those needs are not met. Is that right?
Well, exactly. I mean, stress can happen for a whole lot of reasons, but not having your needs met is a big one. So if you're hungry for too long, that creates stress in the body. That's a need not being met.
Yes.
If you're in pain and you're not getting tended to, that creates chronic stress. And if you're not getting your emotional needs met, either because bad things are happening, like abuse or, active danger, or just that feeling of deprivation, of not being seen, not being heard, it puts the body into this dilemma where it's carrying this load of stress. And trauma is the wound that we sustain over time that lasts into the future, or I should say into our present now, from that happening. And that can happen in a number of ways. It does happen in the nervous system, and it manifests in the personality as well. So if, for instance, and I'm sure my dad talked about this when you spoke to him, if I learn as a child, either verbally or just through observation, that my anger is going to have negative consequences for my relationship with my parents, which is to say they don't seem to love me or like me when I'm angry, even if they do love me. But if they can't communicate that love when I'm angry, if all they can communicate is disapproval or worse, punishment, the only lesson I can learn from that, if I'm a human infant, because I can't, or a human toddler or child, I don't have the maturity to say, seems to me that I've been born into a world where people are traumatized and stressed, and my parents certainly seem to have some stresses, and they're not quite able to give me everything I need. We don't know. Everything is about us. Mm-hmm. So what we're saying is, what we're learning is I'm bad, and I'm not going to get my needs met if I do that bad thing. Well, a very intelligent thing the organism could do is learn not to be angry, and not only not to express anger, but maybe not even to feel it in the first place, because that's the only way to guarantee that I won't lash it out, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that creates a strain on all the systems of the body, the immune system especially, given that anger is a kind of emotional immune response. Get away from me. That's bad. I don't like that. That's what anger is, and that's what antibodies do. They attack foreign invaders. So essentially, over time, when the body gets used to splitting, when the nervous system and the mind get used to splitting parts of the self off and suppressing them and pushing them away, we are blocking the flow of energy in the body. And you don't have to be a yogi or new age person to understand that. Yes, literally, emotions are energy. I'm not talking some woo-woo way. I mean, literally, it's electrical impulses. Yes. And if there's a blockage, if you can't go there, well, then it's going to build up in other parts of the system. And then there are all kinds of mechanisms that are too complex for me to get into here, and I probably don't even remember them specifically. But the body's stress apparatus, in particular, this thing called the hypothalamic pituitary axis, the HPA, adrenal axis, all these glands that work together to regulate stress, gets all confused and all shook up. And then we get used to that. And then we live our lives for years and years and years and years with that wear and tear. And then we get sick when we're older.
I love how you phrased it in the book too. Like, it really outlines it really well, how like over time, right, it distresses the hormonal apparatus, it impairs the immunity, it promotes inflammation, it undermines the physical and the mental well-being over time. And I think that's all really powerful as to how you show that exact connection. And so what can we do about it?
I mean, at what point? Who's we?
Well, if anyone's listening to the show and they're kind of having some awakenings going off as we're talking about things they may have experienced, unmet needs that they may have pushed down and avoided, or anger, emotions that they haven't experienced, how can they start that process?
Well, I would recommend reading the book, because you have to understand the situation clearly if you're going to do something productive with the knowledge. You have to see. And we're not the only ones who write about, trauma, but the book does bring together a lot of things that hopefully paint a composite picture of the world we're living in, so that you can both go easy on yourself and have compassion for yourself, but also be accountable for your own healing. You have to be responsible for it, because you're not responsible for the circumstances that molded you, but you are responsible for acting on what you know now, and for, to the best of your ability, or you're not necessarily responsible, but if you want to live a happy, fulfilled life, you better be responsible. That is, response-able.
I always phrase that in a way like, it wasn't my fault necessarily that I got cancer, right? But if I didn't take full agency and full responsibility for where I was at, and if I didn't take a good hard look around at my environment, right, to see what I could change and what I couldn't change, and take accountability for that. If I just said, I got cancer for no reason, and trusted everything to, I believe medical doctors are a huge part of my success and my path, but I needed to take that control and that agency of all the factors I myself could change.
Yeah. And you can see how even doing that would be a big healing injection, not, no pun intended, of healthy things that you probably were denied early in life, feeling like you have a say, feeling like you're connecting with all parts of yourself, feeling like, because in childhood we feel victimized. We are, in some ways, we have no control. So agency is it's one of the several A's of healing that we list in the book. I mean, I would say to people, keep awakening. I mean, keep your eyes open and keep learning about what works for you and what doesn't work for you. Don't get lulled into, positive thinking has its place in terms of keeping our spirits up and connecting with others and not getting down in the dumps and all that. But positive thinking can also kill people, because if we're positive to the exclusion of looking at the nasty stuff that we're afraid of, then we're not looking at those dark corners, and they just fester. And
yeah, I like to call that unrealistic optimism, that almost like that fake positivity,
yeah,
when people are like, oh yeah, so I've got this. And a lot of people, I think they always praise me on my journey for being so positive, right? You always were so positive. And I'm almost very cautious when I respond to that, because I do believe in having a positive outlook. However, it has to be a very realistic positive outlook at the same time. And so I had to give power. People, like, I prepared for the worst. When I had this 2-month terminal prognosis, I didn't just say, yeah, I'm going to survive this. Like, right. I acknowledged, as I call it, this big fire breathing dragon of cancer that was bearing down my throat, like it was right there. I had to own that and acknowledge that. And then at the same time, take that accountability to take the action that I could in changing the environment. But if I didn't own all of that, right, this big fire breathing dragon of cancer, I wouldn't have risen on the other side with taking the agency and accountability for all that I needed to change in my environment. And so I had to be really, really, really real. And to be honest, everyone always asks, what's the one thing, what's the magic bullet that you did to change your circumstance? And I don't know. I don't know if I'm here from a gift from above. I don't know if it was from my transformation. I don't know what it is. But for me, I felt that it was this one day when we had this nanny that came to bring my kids to the hospital. And the situation was very dire at the time. And this new nanny, I hadn't even met her before. She just seemed so surreal, sitting there with my children in this room and having access to the most vulnerable and most intimate of moments. And gosh, she left with my children, and I watched her pull out with my vehicle of the parking lot down below from my bird's eye view above. And my heart literally drove with my vehicle, wondering if she buckled their seatbelts properly, wondering if she was going to signal when she changed lanes, wondering if she was going to speed on her way home, wondering if she had any knowledge of what precious cargo she had in that car with her. I wanted to be the one driving home and making my kids dinner and tucking them to bed. And I wanted to be that person. And I turned around from the window that day and I slung to the floor and I just wept and I wept and I wept and I wept and I wept. And I didn't stop for days. And for me at first, before that moment, I had been like the hostess with the mostest, right? Like, come see me in my hospital room, entertaining 60 guests per day. This is all just, this is just a little glitch on the path, this huge diagnosis of leukemia. Like, I'm attached to 2 poles of all these medications draining in 24/7. Come watch me on my exercise bike. What can I get you from my water fountain? It was so surreal. I was like, yep, I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be fine. No problem. Just a blip. And then this day it all hit, all the things that had been stolen from me, that cancer came in to steal. I had to abruptly stop nursing my youngest son. I missed my oldest go to his kindergarten orientation. I missed my oldest, his 5th birthday party. All these things that cancer had come to steal, that until that time, I was like, yep, I'm fine, because this toxic culture, right, that we live in almost preaches that message. Be positive, this is okay.
Especially to women.
Interesting. Yes. And then this day that nanny had left with my kids, like I said, I turned around from the window and I slunk down towards the floor and I grabbed my knees in just so tight to my chest and I held them tight, like almost like I was in a fetal position. And I just sobbed and I didn't stop for days. And not only did I finally express the hurt, the anger, the sorrow, the deep sorrow from having my life literally ripped away in seconds, going from this, what I thought was this poster child for health and wellness, to being where I was in this moment. I was not only grieving that, but I started to allow myself the space to grieve all the hurt that I had bottled up inside for years. And it's not even, like I said, it's not even like these big traumatic moments, but we have a bad breakup with a guy and you kind of are brushing that off, or stuff with parents, stuff with childhood, and you brush it off. Oh, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. And for me, I filled that space, that disconnect, as you're talking about, with being super busy.
Yeah.
Right. And so I gave of myself to help others. So I was a chiropractor, a sports chiropractor. When my clinic filled up from 9 to 5, of course I would come in early, right? I'd started working at 5:30 because it was so full. I'd stay working until 9. I was trying to avoid all those emotions, I think, that were just underneath. And I went through that process. But in this day in the hospital, in these 4 or 5 days, I just wept it all. And I just released it all. And I felt instantly after this so much lighter and so much more free, like I could finally breathe in a way I had never done before.
Mm-hmm.
And I was given a 2 months terminal prognosis just days after that. But I think that was the powerful point that really was the turning factor for me in my success. But in our toxic culture, you have to fight for your right to be able to do that. Because what happened instantly, once I was done riding that exercise bike, once I was done hosting 60 people a day, and I basically blocked everyone out, I was like, I need to go inwards. I just need to be here. I need to learn these lessons that have come with this. I need to go inwards. And I allowed myself that safe space to be really real and to cry openly about these things, but you have to fight for it, because instantly, then the team psychologist comes in, psychiatrist, with her fancy little clipboard in hand. Oh, what can I get you? What cocktail? I heard you've been crying. Have you been having thoughts? And I'm like, well, if I were having thoughts, I wouldn't be here connected to all this stuff, but I just need the space to release this and to feel this. I need to feel this for the first time in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that for me, of all the other things I did, and changing my environment, finally, the release of that, because I think, if we don't, all those emotions that you're talking about, all that energy, right? When we don't experience it, when we don't allow ourselves the safe space to feel it, because we feel we're going to be punished or whatever, right? We're not going to get loved for it if we do. Those survival mechanisms that we adopt along the way, when we bury those emotions, I don't think they go anywhere. That energy, it festers, it just changes. And whether it becomes illness or whatever happens to it, like, I don't know. For me, that moment was so powerful to finally experience those emotions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're talking about, that's a memoir, but it's also science. That is how it works. Of course, energy doesn't go anywhere. Energy can't be created or destroyed, only, conserved or moved along, and you released a whole bunch, and that makes sense to me. I mean, it's certainly, you're not the only one. A lot of people in the book who experience that, as well as that encounter with the medical system, where the minute you do feel something, they want to suppress it again, as if the problem isn't that you've been spending your entire freaking life suppressing it yourself. They want to bring in an antidepressant to make it go away. I'm not saying that pills don't have their place sometimes, but one of the, anger, and connected to anger, all healthy emotions, agency, autonomy, acceptance, awareness. These are all of the A's that seem to put people in the direction of healing, which I think wants to happen. I don't think we have to it may feel like an uphill climb, but what it is really is finding the river that's flowing in that direction, and then being willing to go in that direction, which goes against all of our habits. But I mean, look, you know a whole lot more about this than I do from your own personal experience. I haven't been through anything like that. The closest thing I've been through is dealing with mental distress, sort of depressions and the kind of bipolarity and all of that. That's my version of the toxic, the echoes of of a difficult childhood. And I would take my path over yours any day of the week,
Can
because
you tell us more about your journey, about your own path?
yeah, I mean, and of course, I think everyone in some ways would choose that. There's a great Yiddish expression. A rabbi once said that if you could bring all the men in the village over, and everyone hangs their troubles up on a coat rack in the front hall, when they leave, every single one would pick his own troubles to put back on over someone else's. That somehow they're made for us, they're custom made, and it's for us to find our own way out. I mean, my own journey, I started having depressions when I was in university, I guess, at McGill. Just a kind of total system collapse at the end of some really great period where I was super active. I was acting a lot in the theater world, and I was writing songs, and I would have shows, but I wasn't pursuing these things academically. I was in a psychology degree, interestingly, and I didn't like it, but I was doing it, and I have a kind of drivenness to prove something. I don't know what I was trying to prove, but I was doing the honors program. I was a year ahead of everybody because I'd done the International Baccalaureate program in Vancouver at Churchill High School and done very well in it. So McGill gave me a full year off, and I was getting more and more fragmented and more disconnected from a sense of purpose of what I was doing there, and comparing myself to other people and feeling, certain alienations that I'd always felt socially were just kind of, you become 19 or 20 and they become super real. You're out in the world on your own, and you don't have that home life to fall back on. You're out on your own. So, over the course of my 3.5 years at McGill, I probably had 3-4 of those major depressions, which lasted for several months. I first went on antidepressant medication then. I had psychologists say to me, look, you're a fascinating guy. You clearly come from an interesting background. I have no idea how to help you, because I was so self-aware. I knew so much about myself.
Interesting.
I've always been very intelligent about my emotions. That doesn't mean I've always been emotionally intelligent. I've only realized the difference recently. And then throughout my 20s, there were a lot of blahs and a lot of deep depressions. And then I moved to New York to study musical theater writing, which was a big turning point in my life. But the depression still came every year or so, every couple of years. And all of this continued in cycles. But what I didn't realize until a psychiatrist, who we also quote in the book, Julie Holland, who's a friend of my dad's, and I happened to see her here, and she said, has anyone ever suggested to you that you might have a kind of a mild form of bipolar? And I said, no, they haven't. But the minute she said it, something resonated for me, because the highs were just as problematic as the lows. There was no one at home in between.
Interesting.
There was no one observed, because when I'm in the highs, I'm king of the world, top of the heap. Like in the song New York, King of the Hill, top of the heap in New York, New York. I can make it anywhere.
I love that you associate everything back to music. I love this.
I have to. It's
You're not going to have long conversations on this one day.
Yeah. I mean, in fact, if you read the book, any song lyric reference that's more recent than Jerry Lee Lewis is probably coming from me.
Okay.
But when I'm in that state, I've solved it. I'm good. I'm never going to be depressed again, because you know what? I've found the key, and I'm doing the right thing, or I'm with the right woman now. I got engaged and married in a very, very quick, very manic kind of way. And everyone around me saw it, and I didn't see it. To me, it just felt like the culmination of everything that was supposed to happen. And now I'm set. When I'm in the depression mode, all of that up stuff is garbage. It's fantasy. It's never going to happen again. It was never real to begin with, and I deserve to be where I am, and this is reality. There's no one at home, and there's almost no middle space between them. And I'd always felt that separated me from a lot of my friends, who they just seem to have a middle ground, a kind of perspective on life where the highs and the lows don't consume them. They can feel them, but they don't consume them.
Looking back, what would be the earliest that you would have thought that would have started? That extreme, the
dynamic. Look, the pendulum got set in motion by my early childhood. I mean, just the environment I was born into was a completely split personality situation. My parents, they're great. They're warm. they're funny, they're genuine, they're loving, they're wise when they're conscious. And when they weren't, they were a nightmare to be around. And literally, I would have nightmares that were basically about my waking life. My dad was a raging workaholic whose rages were terrifying. His voice got very loud, and he would stomp around and scream about his emotions, you know, thinking that was a healthy expression of emotion. No wonder I'm intelligent about emotions. You know, I would hear my dad scream about how frustrated I am, how effing frustrated I am, you know. Okay, so I know what frustration sounds like, but I'm terrified. My little nervous system is terrified. My mom was very anxious, and their relationship, they didn't have a home base of calm together. They would either be in glorious joy and loving each other in a kind of self-absorbed way, or they'd be at each other's throats in a kind of self-absorbed way. And either way, I'm on the outs.
And the highs and the lows.
And the highs and the lows.
Yeah.
So what is my little intelligent, I was born with a very gifted mind and a gifted, you know.
Can tell.
You know, well, thank you. I had perfect pitch. So I could tell the difference between literally, you know, frequencies, you know, kilohertz difference. I can tell that that's an A natural, that's an A flat. I can tell if it's sharp. I can tell if it's off. And
that also conveys energy.
Of course it does.
Yeah.
And that translates to emotional energy too. So what do? Well, I can either just be buffeted by the winds of this gale force hurricane system that I live in and pray for sun and calm, which will come erratically, or I can try to get out ahead of this thing and get really smart and really quick and really intelligent and negotiate with these two and try to stop it in its tracks and try to communicate and try to argue and fight back when I need to. And so I developed this personality that was just extremely animated, mobilized, you might say, into, it was conscripted into a kind of military service, much, much younger than it should have been. And of course, that has an impact because that means I get exhausted. It's tiring a little. You know, it's a superpower, and every superhero has a superpower that's derived from a tragic origin story. They fall into a vat of toxic chemicals. They get bit by a radioactive spider. They lose their parent. They witness their parents being murdered in a back alley, and they develop a sense of rage and outrage and indignation at injustice. Well, so that was my superpower, and it had a cost, which meant that after a certain amount of time of hyper performing energetically, intellectually, emotionally, I would have to crash. I would have to short circuit in order to replenish my system. So depression, in other words, and the mania, neither of them were my enemies. They were actually my friends. They were the two best options I had. And I had to, it was like a trade-off. But what I got robbed of in the process was just the experience of being a normal person, kind of at home in the middle, who has a home base. And the older you get, it creates social problems. It creates romantic and sexual dysfunction. You know, it's very hard to have a stable relationship when that's the case. You're not a good judge of character. I became someone who's very good at charming people off the bat, but then it's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, you know? And I had a hard time. I had a great ability to start projects, but to continue them through time was painful, if not impossible, in a lot of ways. So that diagnosis put my whole life into a kind of coherent perspective, which is something else I would say to people, just to bring it back to the more general thing for people listening, because not everyone, in fact, no one listening was the son or daughter of Gabor and Maté. So they're going to have their own story that's different. But we all have our own version. You have to make sense of your own life. There's meaning in all of it. There's meaning in the suffering.
Yes.
It's coherent. It all happened to you. It all happened in one lifetime. And we get split and fragmented so much that it seems random and just, it seems absurd when we look back. We can't make sense of it. Coming to make sense of it, seeing the whole story as a holistic thing, and seeing, oh, of course I responded that way. Of course, I made it mean that about the world and about myself. Of course, I developed that superpower or that coping mechanism. Of course, my body has been stressed out by that since then. Of course, my mind got split. Okay, now that makes some sense to me. Well, you're starting to bring things together into a coherent whole, which, guess what? The word whole is the root word in the word healing. That's what healing is. Healing isn't curing. I mean, I think it's wonderful, Erica, that you have overcome, come through, survived, however you want to put it, all of the physical challenges that you have. But that's not the healing. The healing, like you said, is the bringing together of the parts of yourself, the reconnecting with your emotions. The healing happened before the cure happened. And some people, the healing happens and the cure does not happen. And we live in a death phobic culture. Death is something we don't want to look at.
Yes.
If you want to read a beautiful book about that, a Canadian author named Stephen Jenkinson wrote a book called Die Wise, which is an incredible look at how we just push death away. It's a very challenging but beautiful read. You know, and so we don't want to look at death, and we don't want to succumb to our illness. But the fact is, we're all going to die. And we don't know what the purpose of our lives or our deaths is, but we get to try to connect with that. But if we're only pursuing a cure in a desperate attempt to push away our own vulnerability and our own mortality, then we're not connecting with our wholeness. Because guess what? You can't be a whole human being without being mortal. Death is not the opposite of life. Death is it's the basis of life in a sense. We can't live unless something else has died, right? So as coherent and whole a picture of ourselves as we can develop while we're alive is the extent to which we're going to heal. And that's going to look different for everybody.
For me, that healing really, it wasn't the cure necessarily, like you just said, but people ask, like, what did it feel like, you know? And for me, I was always so go before, you know, I was always looking to what was coming 5 days next. I was never in that moment. And for me, that healing comes from this calm in my heart that I never otherwise could have ever experienced before. Like, and I'll give an example, like, you know, I've got 2 active boys, and my previous life before, I would have been like, okay, let's go for a little run on the seawall. I'll let you stop for 2 minutes and build a little fort at the beach, but only 2 minutes. And then we've got to go to here.
Go.
And I had to be moving the whole time. I don't know what I was running from, but I had to be moving, you know? And now with all of these profound awakenings and all of these experiences and these aha moments that I've gone through, I just sit on that beach and I just watch my boys frolic, and I have such a level of content.
Well, that means you're connected with yourself and you're complete in and of yourself, which means you don't need some adrenaline stimulation or some external stimulus to keep you regulated. You're able to actually, you know, the world regulates you. You're in relationship with reality. I mean, good God, if I could give up my phone and my addiction to scrolling, especially since the book came out with all the extra attention that I'm getting. I just crossed the 10,000 followers threshold on Instagram. Ooh, that'll burnish your sense of ego really well, you know? And of course it keeps you up at night and it's totally meaningless. It's just totally, and it's nice. I like connecting with people, but it doesn't change who I am.
Of course.
And if I get too attached to it, then the minute it goes away, the minute I'm not constantly being reminded of how important or popular or interesting I am, I feel deficient and I need to fill it with something, whether it's food or sex or behavior or blah, 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 blah. And that's the cycle of the treadmill of consumption and craving that our toxic culture on the economic level totally capitalizes on. It counts on us feeling that way about ourselves. So you finding that contentment inside yourself was a sign that something had been reconciled inside of you so that you didn't need to keep running for it. I know we're live, but would it be all right if I muted myself for a second and took a quick bathroom break?
Sure. Actually, you know what? We need to wrap up anyhow. Okay. For time's sake, but you and I are going to have many more conversations to come.
Okay. I do see that Jackie Silverfish asked a question. I'd love to
Oh yeah, was that that's right. Dwight, can you pop that back up? Thank you. Okay, so what effect can healthy friendships or relationships in adulthood help to overcome early childhood trauma?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know about overcoming. That's not a verb that um I'm not trying to nitpick here. It's just for me, that's not a verb that I tend to use very much. I think of overcoming as like Martin Luther King, we shall overcome systemic racism, and it's a, collective struggle and activism. When we start using that kind of language, we might get a little combative or a little positional about it. But to heal early trauma, I mean, I know what you mean. So I take the question in the spirit it's meant. Um, I would say to balance early trauma, or to fill, what we're doing is we're plugging those holes that were created or that never got filled.
Hmm.
You're compensating for it in a way that actually compensates you. It's not one of these unsustainable compensations, because one of the ways we can cope with early childhood trauma is to constantly have unhealthy friendships or unhealthy relationships, right? To have as many sexual partners as we can,
Yeah,
or
fill that,
to have
fill that space.
friendships that flatter your ego all the time. You see this with famous people all the time. Have yes men and yes women around you. They're doing that to try to overcome something they can't overcome because it happened. You can't overcome your past. I'm sorry, you just can't do it. And if you try to overcome your inner wounds, then you're kind of being a little violent towards them. But if you can actually tend to them and say, okay, I didn't get this one, so what do I actually need? Are these unhealthy friendships giving it to me? No, you start to get discerning, which you couldn't do as a child. You can say, oh my God, this thing I've been using to plug the gap actually causes me more harm now than good. It's served me this far. Now I want something else. What do I really want? And if you actually tap into that, yeah, healthy friendships, healthy relationships, we can draw those things towards us and insist on them, which for a lot of people will mean setting boundaries they've never known how to set, because you got to say no to some people if you're going to say yes to others. Your yeses don't mean anything unless there's a healthy no.
Yes.
Then you're learning to seek and to hunt and to gather the nutrients that you always needed in life, which it's an antidote in a lot of ways. It subverts the traumatic wound. It says, actually, no, I'm not irrevocably broken. I do have something. I do have people who care about me, and I have things to give as well. And love and life can be a give and take and a back and forth. And this feels good, and I want more of it. I want to build more of it in my life. So, your childhood wounds will heal over time, I think, when you give them room, when you don't keep trying to numb them out by means that don't really work. If it's those unhealthy behaviors or those unhealthy relationships, you leave them alone, you look at them with some compassion and some love, and then you ask yourself, what do I need now? Well, now you're fulfilling your needs through healthy means, and the wound can get, the wound doesn't have to be reinfected, because the pain of loss, every time I've had like an exciting romantic adventure, it feels like I've healed the wound. I really think I have. That's what my marriage was. But then there's the pain of loss because it was never secure to begin with. I didn't really listen to my instincts. And that hurts again and again and again. So you learn to just find healthier sources for your needs, which is what you were denied in the first place. So yeah, you are in a sense overcoming, or at least you're rewriting the story.
I almost had to imagine myself like when I was going through those unmet needs that I had as a child, or whatever point on my path. I had to look back on myself and give myself as a child, see myself as that child, and almost like hold myself as that child in my visualizations, and give myself that compassion or that hug that I just wanted in that time, that I didn't get. And that's for me how I tried to heal those wounds. I would give that to myself, because I think when we look for it externally, when we didn't have it before, like you're saying, in relationships or in sex or in other places, it's not filling that void, right? We really need to pay attention to it and give it that space to breathe and feel it and experience it. And
what I really like about that is that the trauma response, the trauma reaction, is a kind of unintentional time warp where we get sucked back. We write about this in chapter 1. all of a sudden you're dealing with your spouse in the present moment, but you're acting like a 2-year-old because your old wound is triggered, and you're unawares, without your consent, you're sucked through a wormhole back into your early childhood, but you don't realize it. And you're trying to deal with the present as if that is happening. And now you're out of whack and everything is crazy.
Yeah.
What you're doing is a kind of conscious time travel. You're saying, okay, I'm going to actually travel back for a purpose with an intention to give my little self what she needed.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's about bringing the unconscious to the conscious, bringing the background to the foreground, bringing awareness to what has been obscured. And then the content will never change. Your childhood will never change, but the context can change. The container that you are for all of that can change.
Yes.
And that's the responsibility that you're taking.
And I want to preface too, with all this knowledge and all this wisdom and all this awareness, right, about these emotions and how they play out, even as we grow, right? We get this book and we read it. We can all cast self-judgment on ourselves when we get back stuck in these coping mechanisms that we know no longer serve us. But it's so habitual, it's so patterned, from doing it for so many years of our lives. And then we can cause self-judgment on ourselves for getting back in those grooves, even though we have the knowledge and we have the wisdom. But coming from a point like, we're never making it to that final, we're all on this path of like personal growth, and there's never an end point, like we're all practicing. But I find personally, the more awareness that we have, the quicker we can revert and the quicker we tune in to the fact, oh shoot, I'm doing those coping mechanisms that don't actually serve me.
Yeah,
right.
I find that to be
and so
true.
That's the goal, right? Yeah. To change that reaction time and make that quicker, make us realize it sooner that shoot, this pattern isn't serving me. I need to shift.
Maybe even in advance, maybe even before you fall into it.
Right. Can I ask one last question? So now that you have all of these bits of wisdom and knowledge and self-reflection about yourself, right? And these points as to how they impact your current relationships and your current life. Has that improved your current relationships now?
Well, I mean, it's improved my relationship with myself. I'm not currently in a relationship with somebody else, an intimate one. Mm-hmm. I've always been blessed with good friends who have loved me unconditionally and listened to me and all that. But my relationship with myself is better than it's ever been.
Wonderful.
And what that means is at this moment, I'm neither in a depression, nor am I on some blazing high where I'm like seeking a partner. I'm craving it. No, I'm like curious about it. I wonder what the next relationship's going to be like. I wonder who it'll be. I wonder how I'll meet them. I wonder, what'll be different. I wonder if I can slow the thing down and notice my patterns coming, because I know they're going to come. I'm not expecting that I'm going to be radically different. I'm going to have the same impulses, but like, oh, what would it be like to like pause at this moment and not say that thing that I always say that gets me in too deep or whatever, So there's curiosity, there's openness, and there's a kind of, I don't know, it's like almost a beginner's mind, realizing I really don't know the first thing. I mean, Joni Mitchell said it the best, and I'll end with a song lyric, right? I've looked at love from both sides now, from up and down, or from give and take, and still somehow it's love's illusions I recall. I really don't know love at all. Mm-hmm. And that is actually exciting to me, that there's a whole lot more to discover. And but it does mean grieving the way it's been, because my habits are very dear to me. I like my sufferings. There's a part of me that does not want to change.
Interesting.
And that doesn't think it's possible, or that says, even, this is the addicted part of us. I know the consequences are bad, but I love that high. I don't want to let go of that rush. And I'm afraid that if I do, it won't be as good. So it takes a certain amount of a leap of faith and amount of willingness to have something new happen in our lives. And you have to really intend that, I think. So I'm feeling that intention is there, but there's no urgency. I'm not, I'm liking who I am, period. And I'm feeling like, rather than looking for the one, I'm practicing just being the one, which is a nice place to be.
I love that. It sounds like you too found this calm and level of contentment in your heart too from this journey.
I mean, I have, but I have to say, a couple of months ago, I wouldn't have said that. A couple of months ago, before the book came out, I was in one of my lows. So
I see.
So I'm, pride comes before a fall. Every time the only person only people on earth who say, I'm healed or you're healed are like, you know, faith healers in the South who slap people in the foreheads. And, you know, we know what those guys are up to. So I'm healing.
Well, like I said, you were the perfect example, right? We're never at that end point.
No, there is no
right?
end point.
Right. We're all on this path of just growth and doing our best, right?
Yeah,
with the knowledge that we have.
It's a direction of movement. We call healing a movement
Yes.
towards wholeness, not some point on a map. It's you know, it's a non-linear line.
Yes. Yes.
Anyway.
I've loved our conversation today.
Likewise.
As Daniel said earlier, Risers and Thrivers, keep learning, keep awakening, find meaning. All the best. We can't wait to see you on Friday for our next live. Daniel, would you like to close the show?
Could I plug something quickly?
Yes.
If you want to check out my mental chiropractic service, which
yes,
you can read all about at my website, walkwithdaniel.com. It's this thing I do, which is very different than what my dad does, but I think it's complementary, and I really love doing it. So if people are interested, they can check it out there.
Tell my viewers ever so quickly how you started referring to the term mental chiropractor.
Someone gave me that term. I was actually, this is back when I was married. I was married to someone who was apprenticing with my father in the ayahuasca healing space. And I was kind of going along for the ride. Yes. And I was apprenticing with my father, which you can imagine is a whole thing.
Yes.
But one of the participants said to me, "You're really good at this, but you're not like your dad." I said, "Thank you. I'm glad to hear it. You know, you're not a therapist, you're a mental chiropractor." I said, "I like that." Because a chiropractor, as you well know, Erica.
Yes.
And I hope the chiropractors out there won't be offended that I'm borrowing their
I love it
as kind of a metaphor. Chiropractor isn't going to spend a ton of time asking you about your childhood or the sources. They want to get in there and let's adjust, let's align,
let's shift.
Let's shift. Let's get the pain down. Let's get the alignment in. Let's get your functioning, your flexibility, your suppleness. Let's get that nerve unpinched. You can't do any healing when you're all constricted. I don't deal with the capital I issues in people's lives. I'm not going to talk to you for hours about your childhood trauma. I'm not going to spend weeks with you talking about your daddy issues. But if you're seeing your dad next week and you're nervous and stressed about it, like Thanksgiving's coming up or Christmas or whatever, and it always goes a certain way, or you have this specific resentment towards him, or if you're feeling this specific pang of guilt about your kids, or just something where your mind is stuck on something. I'm not talking about nervous system trauma that's involved, but if your mind is stuck on something, and no matter how much you know, you intellectually know it, it's not getting you past that acute stress. That's what I call being stuck. Mm-hmm. And then, so we take a walk together, usually by phone, because most of us are not in, most people are not in New York. And we lift up the hood. We create an intention to get unstuck. First of all, you have to create a real strong intention, because like I said, there's a part of all of us that loves staying stuck. We're perfectly comfortable, actually. We'd rather stick with the familiar and the shitty than the new and the unknown. Some part of us. So we have to access that part of us that has the courage and the fortitude and the intention to get unstuck. And then we just go to work. You know, we lift up the hood, and I show people how their minds, I kind of show people their minds. Say, oh, you see how those wires are crossed up there? You notice how those two things are contradictory, how you say you believe this, but this is how you're acting. You say that you have this value, but you seem to be committed to this in practice. When people see it, it gets aligned. People just are like, oh, okay. Well, that's clearly not worth it. So it's a fun, creative process. And I don't mean for people to come back the next week. It really is. You know, people can come back to me for repeated sessions, but I want to deal with one stuck thing at a time. And it's a lot of fun, and it takes something.
I love that. Well, we can have you on the show many, many more times to talk about it all. I've loved our conversation, and hang tight after we go off the live. I have a couple more questions just to touch base before we go. Thanks, Risers and Thrivers. We can't wait to see you on Friday. All the best. Make it a great day, my friends. Bye-bye.